On the big phone-in, front page news today. I'm asking, has the death of Dalian Atkinson changed your mind about tasers? A former Aston Villa footballer called Dalian Atkinson has died after being tasered by the police. Eyewitnesses claim that Atkinson had been in a wild rage and had been trying to strangle his 85-year-old father when the officers arrived. Today's papers report his final words were, "I am the Messiah," before he was tasered 4 or 5 times. He was taken to hospital by ambulance but died of a cardiac arrest. Reports this morning suggest Dalian Taylor had heart and kidney problems, which could have left him more vulnerable to the stun gun. Well, this case has once again opened the debate on taser use in this country. So have your say this morning. I want to know, has the death of Dalian Atkinson changed your mind about tasers? Callum MacLeod is the Vice Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. He's told the BBC police officers are professionals, and despite today's news story, they remain a very useful tool for the British police force.
3 days intensive training and refreshed every year, I think, is sufficient at this moment in time. It's obviously got to continually be reviewed in relation to whatever situation we find ourselves in, but we are dealing with professional people who are used to dealing with conflict. This is a valuable tool that is used to protect the public, protect the officers, and ensure the society is safe.
Well, Richard Taylor campaigns to limit the use of tasers by the police.
It's becoming increasingly likely now that if you come into contact with the police, they will have a taser. And my concern is that we're not having a proportional use of force. And having our police use a proportionate amount of force in any situation is what everyone says is what we want, and that's what the police and police chiefs say we want to see as well. But when you've got a taser, it's very difficult for a police officer to know what the impact of them pulling the trigger or pressing the switch on that taser is really going to be.
Well, Richard will be on the JVS show very shortly, but I want to hear your reaction to this story today. Has the death of Dalian Atkinson changed your mind about tasers? Phone lines are open now for your calls, 03459 455 555. You can text me as well, 81333. Start your text with 3CR. Texts are charged at standard network rate. You can email me here at the BBC, jvsshow@bbc.co.uk. And you'll find me on Twitter if you want to tweet me, twitter.com/JVS show. Has the death of Dalian Atkinson changed your mind about tasers?
Have your say on today's big phone-in.
Call 03459 455 555.
The JVS Show.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
So Richard Taylor has been campaigning to limit taser use for the last 8 years. He joins us now. Good morning to you, Richard.
Good morning.
Has the death of Dalian Atkinson changed your mind about tasers?
Well, it hasn't, no, because I've been campaigning against all frontline officers having tasers for quite a number of years now. I've supported the firearms officers having a taser as a less lethal alternative to a conventional firearm, but I haven't wanted to see what I think is quite a big change in the culture of policing, and actually quite a big change in the culture of our country, where we've moved to a situation where it's increasingly likely that that the police that you encounter, whether it's a response call or whether it's police on patrol, will be armed with tasers. So no, but what perhaps I think this has done is it's brought this change to the attention of more people. It's been a very slow change over the last 8 years or so, as police forces around the country in a piecemeal manner have been, every few weeks you get an announcement that a few more tens of officers have been authorised to carry tasers, and over a long period of years, we've seen quite a dramatic change in the sharp end of policing in Britain. So I think it's really important that we debate this, we discuss it, and we have the discussion about what kind of police force we want. And I don't want to see a police force where we're getting more and more policing by force rather than policing by consent.
How often do you go out with the police then?
I don't. I've never done that.
You've never been out with the police, and yet you believe that the police do not need tasers routinely.
That's right, because I think the police's view is an important one to listen to, but really...
Very important. They are the people that protect us.
But it's also a question for all of us. So we know that the police would, the police federation, the police representatives would like to see even more officers armed with taser. But it's for all of us to decide and to look at other countries where the police are armed with tasers more and with guns more, and
Richard,
to decide what kind of country we want to live in.
With the greatest of respect, it's very easy to be an armchair critic, and it's very easy if you've never actually been there with the police dealing with a dangerous or violent criminal to be critical and to suggest that tasers would be the wrong weapon to use and the police cannot be trusted in some way to use those weapons. I have been out with the police. I have been involved in arresting someone who was a very dangerous criminal with one police officer on her own who, thank goodness, had a taser that she was able to not deploy, but to warn the criminal that she had and she would use if necessary. It is terrifying out there.
Well, I think that even in that situation where you're using a taser to warn is undesirable, because I don't want to see policing done on the basis of a threat of force.
Richard, again, I'm sorry, but you're talking from a position of complete and utter ignorance. I say that with the greatest of respect, but I have been there. This guy was 6'5". He was enormous. I was with a female police officer who must have been 5'5", 5'6", arresting a man who was known to the police for having carried knives and been very, very aggressive in the past. Now, how on earth are you supposed to control a man that big, that powerful, on your own, if all you have is a little can of CS spray and some handcuffs?
Well, I don't want to see the police escalating the level of violence. I think it actually make it harder to police the country.
It's not. It's no. It wasn't escalating violence. All she had to say was, "I want to make you aware. I have a taser and I will use it if you kick off. So if you can just get in the car quietly, if you behave yourself, then there won't be any need to use it." And as a result, just the threat of using the taser was enough to contain his behaviour.
Well, in a civilised country, the threat that I would like to see is not one of violence and force, but the threat is that you would be dealt with by due process. You have
we'd all like to go and live in the woods with Hansel and Gretel, but life unfortunately out there. You go out there on the streets on a busy Friday or Saturday evening when people are drunk, when people are on drugs, where you've got deprived people who are behaving in an appalling way because they have committed crime and they want to try and evade the police. It is very dangerous out there. We don't live in a fairy tale world.
I don't think it is a fairy tale world when we have laws which punish people severely for crimes for violence against police officers. And if we have a speedy, transparent justice system and people know that if they assault a police officer, they will face court and they may well face jail, then that is the way that a civilised country polices itself, and that's the way that we've operated in this country, and that's our tradition of policing that has served us well for decades, and one that I think we can maintain.
Has it occurred to you how many lives have been saved because of the taser? It's all well and good highlighting a case such as the one we're talking about today, where a man has lost his life, but how many lives are saved every year because police have access to tasers now?
Well, I don't think that's an easy thing to come up with. I don't think we can come up with that number. But my concern is that actually, if we will end up with a less safe country, I do not want to see us go down the line of an American-style policing by force. I think that the British style of policing by consent has served us well, and I think it is something that is really worth maintaining. And I think if we want our police officers to be using a proportionate amount of force, I think sometimes a taser will be the right choice, and that's why I want the armed officers to have it as an
but how many
alternative.
armed officers are there, and how long have you then got to wait for the armed officer to get to a scene where someone is posing a very dangerous threat to another member of the public, or maybe even to themselves?
Well, the advantage of the armed officers is that those people are the incredibly highly trained people, and they're the experienced people. They are the people who I would want to be in a situation and to be making a decision on what the proportionate amount of use of force is, whether it's to use a taser or to use a firearm. And yes, we can't have we can't have an instant response with a firearm or with a taser. That's not always going to be available. We can't have everybody being armed with these weapons. We can't have all security guards or police community support officers armed with them, and I wouldn't want to see that. But I
put it to you, and I challenge you, Richard. I challenge you to make contact with your local police force and to ask if you can go out with some of the officers on a Friday or a Saturday night. And I put it to you that you will change your mind on this. If you go out, if you see what life is actually like, if you see the kind of danger that the police are in when they are out there trying to keep us all safe so that we don't have to look after ourselves, they look after us, and I bet you will change your mind.
Well, I don't think we should just look at this through the perspective of the police. I live in this country. I see what goes on, and it's about.
You don't see what goes on. You can't see what goes on. Otherwise, you wouldn't be talking like this.
Well, I don't think that the police point of view is. I think it's an important point of view, but it is definitely a question for all of us to decide how we want to be policed, and whether we want to have our police armed with tasers and with guns, and to what degree we want our police armed with tasers and with guns, and whether or not we want to have a more civilised approach, which has served us well.
Stay there if you would. Let me bring Roger Gray in, who's a former firearms tactical advisor and the author of Target Trojan. Hello to you, Roger.
Good morning.
Good morning. Richard absolutely believes that the only people that should carry tasers are the armed police officers, because they're the only ones that really have been trained to the degree that is necessary.
Well, I think you've presented a very a fair range of arguments that I would have put forward anyway prior to me entering into this conversation. But, you know, the training that's given to officers who deploy tasers, and first of all, let's be clear about this. The taser is a resource. It is not a weapon. It's a resource. It will be equal in both cases. So the requirements that are placed upon officers that carry tasers, whether they carry firearms as well or not, is the same. So one is equally trained as another. And you make a very viable point concerning the immediacy of the availability of a taser where it is necessary. And I think we have a case in question in recent history that makes out the argument very, very strongly. Let's look at the incident at Leytonstone, which I think most people, Leytonstone Underground Station is, most people are very aware of what went on there. We had a deranged man who attacked and tried to slash the throat of a member of the public, then went on to try to attack other members of the public with a knife. He then confronted local officers, again with a knife, with a high risk of injury, and because of the deployment of a taser, he was able to be safely arrested. So what lives and injuries were saved there, including the suspect, because there was a taser. You know, if we hadn't have had tasers, that incident would have rolled on, and the probable consequences of that would have been that an armed response unit would have attended, taken into account if there were no tasers, they would have attended, and it was quite likely, you know, that he would have been shot. You know, I can look back in history now to a particular incident that occurred before we had tasers to use, where a man confronted us with what appeared to be a firearm, and as a consequence, he was shot and he died. Now, if we had tasers at that time, that man might very well be alive today. What price do you put on sensitivity?
But you will surely accept that this death of Dalian Atkinson has now sent a message out there that you can no longer brand the taser a non-lethal weapon. It can be lethal.
Jonathan, it was never vaunted as a non-lethal. It was vaunted as a less lethal, and it's all a question of degree. What we have to bear in mind is that every arrest is an exercise of force done under the umbrella of the legality of our system. And that, you know, when you're arresting somebody, if you swing a baton, if you use CS gas, if you throw a punch, whatever happens, and all these things can be necessary in the course of an arrest, depending on the opposition that you reach, all of them can have tragic consequences. You just never know. I mean, you can present the argument that by introducing a taser into the equation earlier on, the continuation of violence ends. So the balance is probably in favour of using the tasers to keep the violence level down. And you made a very salient point, which I'm going to reinforce, which is, it's a pity that police forces aren't using the opportunity to display what lives and injuries have been saved. We should be taking into account of the figures on both sides, and the balance is going to be in favour of having the taser present and omnipresent where we can do so. If we look abroad, and certain references were made to what goes on in America and so on and so forth, look at what's going on out there at the moment, the way that they use firearms and so on and so forth. Look at the police force in this country and the way that it reacts and how responsible it is, on the whole, in all its dealings with the public. And I really think, here in England, we're doing pretty good.
Thank you very much, Roger. Richard, I just wanted that's Roger Gray, who's a former firearms tactical advisor and the author of Target Trojan. I'd quite like to ask you, Richard, if you and your family were at home one evening and somebody broke into your property and they were high on drugs, and I don't know if you're aware of it, but when people are high on drugs, it can give them an extra, almost subhuman level of power and strength within their body. That person breaks into your house, you call the police. The two police officers that arrive, would you rather those police officers came with a taser or not?
Not, I would say, and
also
hopefully after this event in particular, I hope that if they were armed with taser, that they would be more aware now of the potential risks of using the weapon.
Have you ever been, just out of interest, have you ever been the victim of crime?
Yes.
What kind of crime?
I've had my house burgled, for example.
Right. Were you there at the time? Did you see the burglar?
No, I wasn't, no.
Okay. Well, let me just tell you, a lot of criminals out there are very dangerous. A lot of criminals out there are drug addicts, and they are committing crime because they're trying to get money to fund their drug habit. They are very, very, very prepared and very capable of being violent and being aggressive. They don't think like you or me. You or I would do anything to avoid violence, I'm sure. We would, if we were involved in some kind of conflict, we would probably use words rather than our fists. But there are lots of criminals out there who do not think the same way. And it is a dangerous job policing those people, and it is a dangerous thing to come into contact with those criminals. And I would far rather the police who turn up when I call 999 to say, help, there's a madman in my house smashing things up and threatening me and my family, I would far rather those police officers that turned up had a taser and were able to defuse the situation very quickly.
Well, I disagree with you, and I think that, if the assessment is made that you do need expert officers with tasers and firearms in a situation, then they can, of course, be called. But what I don't want to see is that being the norm and that being routine.
So the police officers who arrive at my house, they say, we've got a bit of an issue here. The guy that is in this gentleman's house who's called 999, he's just grabbed a kitchen knife, a big kitchen knife, and he's now threatening us, and he's also threatening the occupants of the house. Can we have a firearms unit, please? Yes, that's fine. The firearms unit is 25 minutes drive away. Oh, OK, well, we'll all sit here then. We'll just sit it out and wait for this madman in this person's house for 25 minutes until the armed officers arrive. I mean, come on.
Well, and hopefully by the time that 25 minutes has elapsed, the situation will have de-escalated itself and have been resolved by...
Or people have been killed.
Well, I think that's not the normal progression of things. You're putting forward an extreme and unlikely situation.
Can you just stay there, Richard? Emma is the General Secretary of Bedfordshire Police Federation, and she's called in to have her say. Good morning to you, Emma.
Good morning, Jonathan.
Hello. You're through to Richard Taylor, who's a campaigner against taser use.
Well, Richard, to be honest, you've stunned me, to be honest. My first thing I'll pick up on is what Jonathan said earlier. Put your money where your mouth is and go out on patrol with police officers and see what they do day in, day out. Go and actually see the violence and the negative behaviour that is given towards them. Go onto our website, bedfordshirepolice.co.uk, click on the ride-along scheme and go along and see, because I'll be honest, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, I wouldn't voluntarily put myself in that kind of situation with
No, but you're
the kind
happy
of
for the
justice
police
system
officers
that
to
we've
do
got.
that.
So if we did have an open, transparent and speedy justice system, I would be much more confident and happy to take up that. And also, I'd be happier to do that if we had a more transparent and open police force. We don't at the moment. So,
but hang on, you're very happy to criticise the police. You're very happy.
I criticise
well,
the police.
you are really you are criticising the police, because you're suggesting that the police that have tasers now, in some way, are not well trained enough to have those tasers, and you feel those tasers should be taken away. So I presume with that comes a level of criticism of our current police officers.
I don't think it is.
You have no idea what you're talking about. Richard, do you know what? 23,000 police officers were assaulted last year alone. 23,000. They were the people that were putting themselves in between good and bad and got themselves assaulted in the process. 80% of taser deployments last year were in a non-firing mode, and only 19% were discharged. In terms of you saying that firearms officers are more trained in firearms. The taser officers have to go through a very strict application process, a very strict assessment process. They are trained just as much in tasers as fully fledged firearms officers on the ARVs. And for you to insult them like that, I'm sorry, but you need to hang your head in shame, because you keep talking about, I wouldn't want to go out and put myself in the way, and I wouldn't want to go out and, go out on a ride-along scheme. No, but you're quite happy for the police officer to do it, who actually might be your neighbour or might be the person that you bump into in the supermarket. Put your money where your mouth is and go and see what they do.
Well, what I'm trying to do is change our society and change the way that we are running the country, so that we have a safer and more civilised country, so that it's a more pleasant place to live in and a more civilised country. I don't want to see this level of assaults against police, and I have no criticism of the police. The people I'm criticising are.
So how are you going to get? How are you going to get in your world, in Richard's world, which we're all getting a little insight into, and we don't, to be fair to you, Richard, we'd all like to live in your world. I mean, your world where everyone is nice to one another and there's no violence or crime. It sounds like a wonderful place to be.
Well,
but sadly,
I want to take our country too.
Okay,
yeah.
so how are you going to get all of these nasty, unpleasant, evil, vindictive criminals? How are you going to get them to behave themselves?
Well, we focus on a speedy, open justice system, which
that works.
What does that mean? What does that even mean?
Well, we are losing it. At the moment, we don't have a very transparent justice system. It's very difficult to find out what's going on in the local courts, to find out what people are being sentenced to.
This is just nonsense, what you're coming out with now. Go back to the question I just asked you. You've got a 25-year-old man who is a heroin addict. He is prepared to rob from anybody that he comes into contact with. He is prepared to be violent. He is prepared, if push comes to shove, to kill someone if he's backed into a corner. He's that kind of person. How are you going to change the way that he thinks?
Right. How do I change society so we don't get into that position in the first place? We start helping people who are addicted to drugs. We treat it, we provide them with access to healthcare rather than criminalising people, and we have a justice system which operates.
Well, that's a lovely long-term aim, and I think we would all agree that in the long term we would all prefer that people who are addicted to drugs don't get addicted to drugs, and we try and solve the problem. However, that doesn't solve the police who get called out at 9:30 this morning to a violent incident going on in Houghton Regis or in Dunstable or in Luton or in any of our towns or villages across Beds, Herts and Bucks. That doesn't help them now.
Well, when they turn up, then they have to use proportional force. And the reason that I'm opposing tasers is because I fear that it is hard for the police to determine whether or not they're using proportionate force.
Emma, but before I let you go, can you just explain to Richard the danger that officers face? I mean, I've experienced it having gone out with the police, with Bedfordshire Police myself. I've seen the danger. Yeah. I have been there in a car with a criminal that was in the back seat of the car who was absolutely terrifying, to be honest. Explain to Richard what kind of danger police are in.
Richard, sometimes police officers go to incidents whereby they may well have information that somebody is violent, somebody may carry a knife, somebody has assaulted somebody. And that is great because they are armed with that knowledge. However, that incident can also turn into something that was unpredictable and something that wasn't planned. But they also go to a lot of incidents whereby that threat is unknown. Police officers don't want to carry taser. When I joined, we had just had batons come out. We don't really want to use any force whatsoever. Unfortunately, society, as you rightly point out, has changed. It has become more violent. Officers don't know what they're going to. People can be unpredictable with drugs, sadly, mental health, and alcohol issues, and the police officers have to protect themselves. I can assure you now that every single member I represent and every single member that, fires their taser, discharges their taser, or is ever involved in the post-incident procedure, wishes that somebody had just listened because they could use the art of communication. Unfortunately, we're not in that world. They go to jobs that people are violent and unpredictable, and they have to try to preserve the life of that person, but also to prevent themselves getting injured at the same time. And I urge you, Richard, please, 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 come along on our ride-along scheme. I promise you it will be a real insight and you won't be disappointed.
Will you take Emma up on that offer?
No, I won't. And our society, I don't think it has become more violent. What has changed is the number of tasers.
What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of?
You're sitting at home. Richard, you're sitting at home watching telly and watching these things on things. You don't understand. You have no idea the violence that's going on. My officers do. But you don't. So you're not in a position to say that.
The increase in taser use has been correlated with an increase in deployment of tasers to more and more police officers.
Emma.
And that is the explanation the police have been giving for the increased use of taser. It's not the case which you've just put forward today, which is that there's been an increase in violence in our society.
Emma, I want to thank you very much indeed. Emma is the General Secretary of Bedfordshire Police Federation. Richard, I know you've given us half an hour, but I've still got more things I'd like to ask you. Can you stick around or have you got to go?
Of course, yeah.
OK, great. Well, if you want to have your say this morning on the big phone in, 03459 455 555.
Travel news for beds, hearts and bucks.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
Good morning, Jonathan. Still a bit slow on the M1 going south from junction 12 for Flitwick down towards 11 for Dunstable and the A505 right now. Otherwise, the delays on the major routes mostly seem to have eased. Still a bit heavy though for the anti-clockwise M25 as you head past junction 16 for the M40 down to 15 for the M4. I'm pleased to say, looking at the train timetables, things are mostly looking pretty fine this morning. Chris Humphries, BBC Three Counties Radio.
For beds, hearts and bucks.
This is BBC Three Counties Radio.
It's 9:30. I'm Lee Agnew. The headlines. The Patients Association says waiting times for planned NHS surgery are at their longest since it began collecting data 6 years ago. It says many operations are being cancelled at short notice, but the government says the figures are misleading. The family of a teacher from Buckinghamshire is demanding that all asbestos is removed from schools. It's claimed that Sue Stephen died after being exposed to the substance at schools in Marlow. A teenager from Buckinghamshire has died at a music festival in Hampshire. The 18-year-old was found unconscious in her tent at the Boomtown Fair Festival in Winchester. And unemployed people in Milton Keynes are being offered the use of a bike for a year. The Get to Work scheme allows job seekers to use Boris-style bikes, which have recently been made available across the new city. In sport, Hertfordshire cyclist Laura Trott leads the women's Omnium at the halfway stage. She's 3 races away from claiming a 4th Olympic gold medal. And the weather will be dry and sunny with cloud building throughout the day, staying warm with temperatures around 23 degrees Celsius, that's 73 degrees Fahrenheit. BBC Three Counties News, more at 10 o'clock.
On FM, AM, digital and online.
This is Jonathan Vernon Smith.
On BBC Three Counties Radio.
Yes, good morning. By the way, before I just tell you what's coming up on the programme a little later on today, on Friday's JVS show, I'll be joined in the studio by the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police, Francis Habgood. Now, Francis was appointed Chief Constable in April 2015. He's a family man with 2 children. and he's responsible for policing more than 2 million people in his corner of the three counties. He'll be with us for an hour on Friday, so if you have a question to ask about the way we're policed, you can contact my team, and whether it's via email, phone, email or Twitter, we'll make sure that your voice is heard, your question is raised. That's the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police, Francis Habgood, in the studio on the JVS show Friday morning from 10. Now, first of all, let me just tell you what's coming up a little later on before I get back to today's big phone in. Of course, at 11 today, I'll be dealing with your consumer problems. Plus, after 10, Wendy from Aylesbury has a 28-year-old son whom she loves. But today, she'll reveal if she could go back in time, she wouldn't have had him. When you looked down at him, when you looked at this little child you'd created, what did you feel?
Nothing.
Nothing? You didn't get that sense of overwhelming love that mums talk about having when they see their child for the first time?
No.
More from Wendy after 10, and I'll ask for your response. But first, on today's big phone-in, I've been asking, has the death of Dalian Atkinson changed your mind about tasers? A former Aston Villa footballer called Dalian Atkinson has died after being tasered by the police. Eyewitnesses claimed that Atkinson had been in a wild rage and had been trying to strangle his 85-year-old father when the officers arrived. Today's papers report that his final words were, "I am the Messiah," before he was tasered 4 or 5 times. He was taken to hospital by ambulance, but he died of a cardiac arrest. And this case has once again opened the debate on taser use in this country. I've been asking, has the death of Dalian Atkinson changed your mind about tasers?
Call Jonathan Vernon Smith now.
03459 455 555.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
And in the last half hour, I've been speaking to a man called Richard Taylor, who has been campaigning to limit taser use for the last 8 years. He's still on the JVS show now. You're still there, Richard?
I'm still here.
Thank you. Let me just read some texts that are coming through. Anne says, Jonathan, I had a man high on drugs break into my house. 6 officers could not easily contain him. He seemed to have almost superhuman strength. The officers had tasers. They weren't used, but with my daughter in the house, I would not have complained if they had been. Richard is living in cloud cuckoo land. Sue in Luton says, I think Richard would like the police to talk their way out of a situation. He's totally out of touch. He should go out with the police. Just watching them on TV was enough to prove to me he would be horrified. A tweet in here from Mac says, Richard Taylor hasn't got a clue. How can he comment on something which he clearly has no experience in dealing with? Text here, JVS, the man is on the phone, needs to go to a fight between 6 blokes and try to stop that fight with no help. Mark in Dunstable, who I believe is a police officer, says, JVS, what world does Richard live in? We meet people on a daily basis that are quite happy to inflict injury to either members of the public or the police. Steve emails to say, Jonathan, unfortunately our courts have let the police and the public down by failing to pass down adequate sentences for violent offences. So those resisting arrest do so in the certain knowledge that nothing much will happen to them. The default procedure should be automatic tasering and 3 months imprisonment for anyone who fails to comply. Our society has a small proportion of habitual offenders who have never been properly dealt with. A policy of zero tolerance would work wonders. Richard is a fool living in a fantasy world full of pink unicorns. His opinion is worthless, says Steve. Do you want to respond to some of that criticism?
Absolutely. Well, I've spent time in the magistrates' court near where I live, and I've seen some of the sentences which have been handed down for people found guilty of assaulting police officers. And I've seen no separate penalty for the assault on a police officer, and I've seen £50 fines for quite serious assaults on a police officer. So I think that we need to have transparent and harsher penalties for people who assault police officers, so that people know that it's something that you really mustn't do, and if you do it, then there will be incredibly serious consequences. And I certainly don't agree with the last commenter there suggesting that the use of a taser should be some kind of arbitrary, summary way of giving instant justice to someone.
I completely agree. If I had my way, I'd routinely taser most criminals.
Well, I think we should go through the court system, and certainly it would be barbaric, in my view, if one of the options open to the magistrates or a judge was to order a tasering. That would just be astonishing. That certainly wouldn't be
Richard,
wouldn't be a civilised society if we did that.
The thing I was very keen to ask you is, you've been invited now by Bedfordshire Police themselves on the programme. They've invited you to go out on one of their ride-alongs where you would get to go out with the police. Hopefully you'd go out on a Friday or a Saturday evening when things are nice and busy, and you would get to go out with those police officers and actually see what they have to deal with minute by minute on a shift. And I hazard a guess that would change your mind. But you were offered that opportunity and you said you didn't want to go. Why not?
Because I do not want to put myself in a position where I would face violence, particularly because I do not have confidence in our justice system. So
you recognise that the police face violence?
I do, but I don't think that their perspective is particularly. It's wanted to take account of, but I think we can all see what's happening in our society.
Do you recognise? Do you know anyone who's a police officer?
Not personally, no.
Right. You are aware that police officers are people's husbands, wives, brothers, sisters, sons and daughters, aren't you? Normal people.
Of course.
They're not robots. They are ordinary human beings. They're mums and dads who have to go out and do their job, whereas your job, I don't know what you do for a job. My job, I just happily turn up to a radio studio and sit in here and talk to people for 3 hours a day. I don't face the kind of danger that they do. They, from the minute they start their shift, know that they could be called to a life-threatening situation, and it could even be their own life that is at threat.
And one of the main reasons for my campaigning is to try and make our society safer, in particular for those people who do that job. I don't think that having the taser and increasing the amount of force that is brought to a situation on a routine basis now helps matters. I think it actually makes the country harder to police. If we go down this line of policing by force, more along the lines of an American-style policing, it becomes harder to police. It'll take more people. It'll be more expensive to police. And I think what we've had in this country of policing by consent rather than policing by force is something that is really worth retaining, worth campaigning for, and will make things safer for everybody, including police officers. And I really think that the justice system is what should be. When we've got is a civilised way to approach things and a civilised way to approach crime. If we want people to comply with a police officer, that compliance shouldn't be on the basis of a threat of force. It should be on the basis of a threat of justice.
Richard, stay there. Pete is a serving police officer and carries a taser, I gather. Good morning to you, Pete.
Good morning.
Good morning. What do you make of Richard's opinion?
I think Richard is a very honourable chap and he has very good aspirations. Unfortunately, the reality of the situation is, and I agree with him, we should police and there should be adequate penalties to, if you like, deter people. The problem you have is, like in this case with Daly and Atkinson and with the ex-soldier Spencer Benyon who died in Wales a while ago after being tasered. These guys, we couldn't get them into the justice system. They're in such a state, they don't care about future punishment at court. So I don't know what happened, but let's say somebody's beating their father up and is in danger of seriously hurting them or killing them. Me standing there saying, you're going to go to prison if you continue, will not stop him. So I've somehow got to stop him myself.
I was going to say, tell Richard what kind of things you as a police officer face on a daily basis that mean you feel safer when you're carrying a taser.
In my service, and I've got a lot of service, I've had guns pointed at me, which admittedly a taser would not have helped, but I've had machetes, knives, hypodermic needles, and people who are so high on crack cocaine and things like that, and they are so strong that it's taken, as you said earlier, half a dozen of us just to hold the guy down. If I'm carrying a taser, I'm actually a firearms officer, so I'm carrying guns as well. If somebody is in danger of overpowering me and I allow them to, they've got my guns. So I can't even let them be close to overpowering me. So I'm going to use a taser if I have to stop them. It's as simple as that.
And have you used your taser?
I've used my taser in the past. I've never had to shoot anybody.
And can you just explain, give us a scenario, because I don't think Richard realises how dangerous life is outside. Did you live in London, Richard?
I live in Cambridge.
Oh, well, okay, fine. So you live in lovely, nice middle-class Cambridge.
Well, it's a city like any other in the country. We have all sorts of...
No, it's not. No, it's not. Cambridge is a lovely city. I know Cambridge very well. It's beautiful. I have relatives who live in Cambridge. It's a lovely part of the world. It is not a city like other cities in the country. There are cities that are very much more dangerous than Cambridge and have areas where you would be absolutely petrified to walk at night. Now, I'm interested to know, Pete, can you tell us why have you had to fire your taser? Give us a scenario where you have had to deploy your taser.
There was a chap, the guy I tasered, he was armed with a very large knife, and it wasn't a specialist knife. It was a knife you could buy over the counter in a shop. It was a kitchen knife. He was high on drugs. He was going to stab somebody he was with, and he wouldn't let us get anywhere near him, and I had no choice but to taser him. Someone was going to get hurt.
So you recognise that man was going to stab somebody, either you or the person that he was with?
Yes, probably the person he was with first, and then he would have come for me. But the point of the matter is, I've got to make a decision quickly at some point about when he's going to use the knife. And it's no good me waiting until he uses it and then going, well, I didn't want to taser him just in case.
So
I don't know the guy's medical background, and I can't ask him that before I use the taser.
Okay, so you taser him, he falls to the ground. What happens then?
He's on the ground, another officer moves in, handcuffs him. I keep the taser on him in case I need to use it again. And then once he's contained and we handcuff him, we remove the taser. We take the wires off so it can't be used, and he goes away, and somebody comes and takes the barbs out if necessary, but they're normally just in their clothing, so we can take them out.
Richard, what a wonderful invention the taser is.
I would fully support the firearms officer we've just heard from having a taser there as an alternative.
But what happens if a firearms officer wasn't the person that arrived on scene? What if it was a regular police officer that was not a firearms officer?
Well, then I don't think those are the right people to be making the decision, because we've heard the police focus on the training with the weapons. What's really important is the training with dealing with a violent situation and de-escalating it, and that's what the firearms officers have more experience and more training in.
But do you recognise that those kinds of situations, they are real, and you don't have 20-25 minutes to wait for a firearms unit to arrive on the scene? Somebody would get hurt or killed in the process.
Well, I do recognise that, but it's about the society we want to see. I don't want to see a society where all security guards at shopping centres have guns and tasers, for example. So we have to take a judgment as a society about where we want these weapons to be held and how many of them we want to have on our streets.
Pete, thank you very much indeed for your call. And Richard, I'm going to let you go as well, because I don't think there's anything anyone could say to you that would change your mind. But I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Richard Taylor has been campaigning to limit taser use for the last 8 years. I don't get it. All I can presume is that people like Richard, and I don't think he's a bad man. I think he's probably a very nice man, a very decent kind of man. But I just think some people are naive. I don't think they realise the level of danger, the level of threat that is out there on our streets in this day and age. I think they genuinely believe that life is really lovely and everybody's nice and you can talk people out of doing bad things. It's just naive. 03459 455 555. And as for this former Aston Villa footballer who has died after being tasered by the police, I mean, of course, any death is sad. However, how many lives have been saved by the taser? That's the question. How many lives here in Beds, Herts and Bucks have been saved because police officers, an awful lot of them now, carry tasers? I bet you we're talking hundreds, if not thousands of lives, and surely that needs to be taken into account. 03459 455 555.
Have your say on today's big phone-in.